All right, welcome back to another episode of Generation to Generation, Bridging the Gap with Rex.
And Eva.
And we are so excited. Actually, I am really excited to have you back because
it's been a minute.
It has been a minute.
So disclaimer before we get started, we had some issues on the hosting side of things with some of our episodes, and so we've been inconsistent the last 3 weeks because we had some issues, and then Christmas happened, and I didn't want to deal with this, and so I'm sorry. I love y'all very dearly, but Christmas Eve and release day co-aligned, and I was like, I'm good, thank you very much, and completely forgot about it. And so, we're getting back to it, and that's exciting, and that's the good part.
Yep, and so a little grace to you.
Yep.
I didn't even realize that it had been a couple of weeks until I asked
daisies.
you. And so totally cool with it.
Well, between everything happening, okay, I got to justify this a little bit. Between everything happening,
justification! I love justification.
I had exams, which I killed.
You
but
did
I worked
kill.
My
Congratulations,
butt off for that.
by the way.
And then I had volunteering and things like that, and work, and then we had Christmas, and so it's been a lot.
It has been a lot, and it's been a minute, and
I'm excited to be back.
And
back at the table.
I'm glad you brought that up, though. You did kill your finals.
Yep.
But you had an oral presentation, which
That
you
was probably
really
the best
did well.
exam I've ever taken. Not even grade wise, which I mean grade wise it was too. It was the only exam I think I've ever made a perfect score on. But the podcast has helped me a lot with it too, I think. But it was an oral exam, and so in my history class, it's all discussion based. And so rather than having us write down things on essay questions or write a paper or something, he was like, I'm going to do a oral discussion where you join a Zoom call with 3 other students that you sign up for, and I ask you questions and you discuss them together, and you show me your understanding, but you also show that you can listen to other people's reasoning and what they say about it and how they handle it, and you can build off it, or you can say, I disagree and here's why, and different things. And I loved it. I brought up some points in the discussion that I had studied super hard for, but still completely confused me because it's all about Enlightenment era philosophy right now. And so it was just a lot of fun. And I think the podcast has helped me become more comfortable with just talking about things that I may not have the best understanding of, but I still know enough. And so I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, and I think that the lesson learned is the ability to engage verbally, which you did exceptionally well. And part of that is answering questions, asking questions, and just engaging people that may have a different viewpoint on whatever the topic may be. Even though you're the presenter, somebody may have an excellent point to bring up. And so I think the podcast has helped you in that respect. It certainly helped me, and we're getting better. Matter of fact, someone this morning asked me about the podcast. They said, hey, I'm looking for it, didn't find it. I said, well, let me send you a link tree. And then they said, well, tell my husband about it real quick. And so I was just telling him, hey, we're in actually today is the 35th episode.
Yeah, well,
Yay,
actually, because we had a couple bridge builders. Yep. So it's closer to 40.
Okay,
so
closer to 40. But
we need to bring bridge builders back.
Yeah, we can do that.
Sorry,
but off topic. But what I told him was, I even know that we're a lot better than we were 7 months ago, and that's part of the point too. You're on things like this. You're not always going to be perfect right out of the gate, but the point is to start, and we did that. And so I just feel that we've made tremendous improvement. You and I have learned a lot about each other, about each other, how to engage each other, and it's been so much fun.
If you're going to recommend the podcast to someone, tell them to listen to our most recent episodes, not our first ones.
Right.
Because we get better every time. And
we do.
Our first episode sounds a lot different than this one.
It does. But you and I made an agreement. Yep. I said, it'll take us to get to episode 100 before we're actually comfortable that it is a really good product. And I didn't even say exceptional product.
Nope.
There's a difference. But I think by the time we get to episode 100 and we're 40% of the way there, it's going to be a really, really good product. And
we'll have some transitions in that with college and all of that. And so it'll get better every time we have to figure something out again.
But that's going to be fun too, because we are going to go to video in 2025. We're going to go to guests. We've been steadily building a list of guests that we want to have on the show. And but that's just sidebar information.
Yes.
So what are we going to talk about today?
Profanity.
How
we use our words and the desensitization of it in my generation.
Okay.
So yeah. So
how did we even come up with this? Context.
Here in Alabama, there's a tradition where people go see Christmas movies at the theaters. A lot of places do it. So we went and saw National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation with a bunch of friends. And we all know the language isn't the best in that. And so at the end of it, Mama grabs one of my friends and she's like, "I'm so sorry for the language." And my friend was like, "It's all right with like my school and even in my own house and the extracurriculars and what I want to do in life. Like, this is nothing." Hi, Dakota. It is nothing. And I think it threw Mama off a little bit. But like, when we're watching something on TV and there's, an F-bomb is dropped or a GD or something like that, it doesn't faze me as much as it does you. Mama, y'all flinch because I'm so desensitized to it. You hear it in the music, in the media, on TV, on Instagram, all these things over and over again. Just walking through a Starbucks, walking through the grocery store, you hear like just language you wouldn't use in a daily life. I don't use it except during road rage or if I stub my toe, but let
that dog out.
Hold on, I'm gonna just keep talking with the mic.
That'll be great.
So it's just like they flinch, and they're more sensitive to it, and so I wanted to talk to us talk about it because my generation just isn't fazed by it as much anymore, and I think it's just an interesting topic of how it was so much more taboo.
Yeah, it's a very interesting topic, and it's a very relevant topic because you have even asked me sometimes in our discussions about a variety of things. You kind of made the comment, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember exactly how you said it, but you said one of the challenges that my generation has with your generation, Dad, is especially for those of us that are Christians, you don't always explain to us, well, why is that? Yep. If the Bible is against profanity, and I believe it is, but why is that? Yeah. Give us some context to that, and I'm going to try to do that in this episode. Yeah. But you're so right. When I was your age, F-bombs and GD, oh my gosh, you just did not say that in public. And if you said it in school, I'm not kidding. You were going to, you said
you get whipped by the principal.
You get whipped by the principal, but you'd be sent to the principal. Yep. It just didn't happen. Yep. And it was so taboo. My football coach, I don't want to dishonor him in any way because he was fantastic. And I let me caveat this. I'm going to go ahead and say his name. He's deceased, but we have talked about him. And he was tough as nails. And I attribute part of my success in my Army career to that football coach because the first maxim was, hey, we're all going to hurt. But just because you're hurt doesn't mean you're injured. There's a big difference between people hurting and being injured.
Didn't you play with a broken collarbone for like 3 days?
3 days.
You didn't realize you were
because
injured?
I was scared to death to go tell Coach that I thought I was injured. But Coach's nickname, everybody knew him throughout the state, Cussin' Bill Smith. Well, there's a reason he got that nickname because he used a lot of words that people weren't using. I'm shocked
your parents, knowing Mom and Paul, let you play for this coach.
It's just, but it's just the way it was. Yeah. But I'm going to tell you this, Coach didn't take that language off the football field.
Yeah.
I remember that about him. On the football field, it was like he would light it up,
Yep.
my friends. But once he stepped off the football field and out of that environment, even there was a common, I'm going to call it common courtesy, decency, civility. You didn't take that language into the class because he taught classes too.
Yep.
You didn't take that language into the classroom.
Yeah.
I never heard him use that language with us individually when we might be walking down the hall to the next class. Coach never talked like what he did on the football field. And so it was almost like this accepted exception. Hey, it's Cussing Bill. He
Only
gets
on the football
results.
field.
Just leave him alone. He's going to contain it to the football field.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of era that I grew up in.
Yep. Well, like for us, it's like nobody really has a big deal with it until it becomes derogatory.
Derogatory, yes.
So yeah, I was like, how do you say that again? I see a lot of words I say I just have read before and have never spoke, but that's when people aren't cool with it, is when it becomes derogatory about it. And so like a lot of my friends use it like just ironically. It's like, it's just like an exclamation. Somebody says something and they're like, oh, and insert event random thing. And so it's just another word. See, I live on two sides of the spectrum. Some days it's more of like it's just a way of language for my generation. And some days I'm like, it's just an example of like a lack of vocabulary to properly explain. But then I say things like, what are some of the words I say a lot? Slay. What's the other one? There's one I say, and people, interesting. I would respond to anything, which is interesting. My friends give me a hard time about, what is the other one that I say?
I don't know. Slay is a big one, though.
And then
you got to tell people that may not know what is slay.
It's just like, okay, cool,
Yeah.
great. Like, you're killing it kind of thing. And so I'm like, I use those words the same way that like some people use curse words. It's just another word to express something. And so I'm like, sometimes I have to like make sure that like the audience I'm with knows that I'm not judging them if they use, just because I don't use them the same way they do and things like that. Like mine, most of the time when you hear me cuss, it's road rage. It's me getting cut off on 280 going, what the is something you doing, you know? And so it's just interesting how like my generation, some of my like classmates, you know, they're the most well-educated, like they have the vocabulary for it, still can cuss you out. But like, it's like unironically, like it'll just be like something that just comes out of their mouth as like just an exclamation for something. And I have to remember that's like, it, like honestly, because I've grown up with y'all being so sensitive to it, I have to remind myself that that's just a way for my generation to
express themselves.
It's just another word. People don't give it as much power.
Yep. And I think that's something we have to keep in mind. And this is where I'm going to say that the generations, because again, that's part of our topic, our whole premise, bridging the gap. You can look at my generation and generally, you've heard me say this. When I go into Walmart, I'm blown away, in all honesty, because I'm always looking, I'm always listening. I'm just that guy. And I listen to the conversations that parents have with their younger kid, especially a 5-year-old. And I cannot tell you how many times I've heard this in Walmart specifically. Parent to a 5-year-old or younger, sit your down, your ASS.
Yep.
It blows me away every time because I would have never spoken to you that way inside of the home or outside of the home.
No.
But I'm not going to judge them either. I think it's a little bit harsh. I would prefer that they use a different tone and a different word. But back to your point,
But
the
like
desensitization.
y'all have told me sit your butt down, and that means the same thing to them. Like that is another word for butt.
It's another
form.
word.
It has no other meaning than that.
But
and
here,
you know, like I'm saying, but like it's just like if you give it power to have a derogatory, like, you know, the negative taboo meaning, then it affects you more than just than it just being another word for another meaning. It's just like saying, what is just two words that have the same meaning. I can't think of the proper term for that.
Stupid is the one that you, yes. That's I think you've talked to me about that example.
I had a babysitter.
Which I don't totally agree with everything you're getting ready to say, but I get it.
But it was a great way to explain it to like a 7-year-old. Is my sweet, I don't know, babysitter. She was also kind of like a cousin, all these things. She had said something, like she had dropped something. She's like, I'm so stupid. And to 7 and 8-year-old me and my cousin, it was like, oh my gosh, this is like She said a bad
She
word.
said the S word.
Yeah. And
The other S word.
Yeah. And so she explained it to us. She sat us down and she was like, there's a difference between me saying, oh, that was stupid, or oh, I'm stupid, and saying, oh, you're stupid. Because when I say, oh, you're stupid with the intention of it being mean to someone, then it has the wrong meaning. But if I'm just saying like, oh, I made a stupid mistake, like, oopsie daisies, I made an accident, like, it was an accident kind of thing, it doesn't have the same meaning. And so when you turn it into the word that's being used against someone, or is supposed to be used in a vulgar way when it's describing something in a vulgar way, then it isn't used. Like it is, I think it can be frowned upon, but it's just different when you're using it just as a word, as, another word to describe
Especially
something.
if you're talking to yourself.
Yeah, especially if you're talking to
yeah.
yourself.
And I agree with that premise from that perspective.
And that's how she explained it to 7 and 8-year-old us, is because we just thought this was the worst word on the planet because it's all we knew. And so she had to explain it to us that there is a difference in it, because she didn't want us to think that was
it's always a bad word. And to your point, and kind of to the broader point that we're talking about, we can make these rules sometimes that we really don't explain. And especially when you were 6, 7 years old, I know a lot of parents that hated that word because younger kids were using it, and they were using it across this spectrum.
Yep.
And so the rule became, hey, don't use the S word, not the 4-letter word, the 6-letter word, STUP, the 6-letter word. Yeah. Okay.
But we didn't know that.
You didn't know that.
Yeah.
And that's the whole purpose of this conversation. Hey, don't just tell people don't use this word. For instance, I can say as a pastor, hey, I'd prefer you not use the F-bomb. I would prefer that you not use GD.
But if you don't explain it to them, they don't know why. There's this wonderful clip I've seen of this news reporter, right? And I don't think the attitude she had during the interview itself was appropriate, but the message was, she slammed her hands on the table and slid everything off it. And she was like, don't quote the Bible at me when the Bible has no power in my life. If I don't know the Bible, that's not a part of my life. I'm not a Christian. This is not something I read or understand. Don't try and correct my behavior using the Bible when the Bible has no meaning to me. And I think that's a lot of the way the Christians talk to each other, is they just explain it to you like that is the most important thing in your life. But then they remember a vast majority of the people don't know God, or they don't know their Bible. They may know God, but still don't know their Bible. And so if you just say this is wrong, but don't explain why this is wrong, even the principle of it, because even if you don't agree with everything the Bible says, it still has a lot of good principles in it you can pull away from it. Morally, our government is founded off a lot of it. And so when you look at it, you have to explain in depth. We don't say this because of it can be derogatory. It could be taken the wrong way. It's not professional. And you have to make it almost a secular definition. That way that when they see it in the Bible, if they ever come to know Christ, they understand the why behind it. And it doesn't just become a right or wrong thing.
Exactly. And so I think a lot of times, especially in the 70s, 80s, 90s, church became really mean because we kind of just told people, hey, don't do this, don't do that, don't say this, you can't watch this movie, all this stuff. Well, let me give you a verse, though, because I would like to give some context to what we're talking about. And I'm going to give you an Old Testament verse first. Proverbs 2:12, it says, wisdom will save you from wicked men whose words are perverse. Okay, well, what's a perverse word? It didn't say profanity. Nope. It didn't say cuss word. It didn't say swear word. It said perverse. People who don't know the Bible are
going to say, well, isn't the Old Testament irrelevant because of Jesus? And so you have to explain it.
You have to explain it from that context. So,
and if you don't understand it, don't correct people on it either, I feel like. Is if you can't explain yourself why you I don't know. I just feel like, sorry, but it's like politics. Don't complain about the political situation if you aren't actively voting in it. And so with this situation, if you don't actually know the Bible, the verse and what it means, and how it, why it applies the way it does, then don't try and condemn people to it saying, well, the Bible says this, because then you can say, why? I don't know. Well, it means nothing to them now.
Right. Yeah. So let's study it a little bit. So I did study it, by the way. Perverse. I don't do this a lot, but sometimes when you're having this type of conversation, you do need to go back. Well, what's the Hebrew word for perverse? You want to know what it is?
What?
It's tapuka. Okay, tapuka. Takpukot, tapuka. Okay, but here's what it means. Purposeful, purposely, offensive, contrary, rebellious, or obstinate. That's a perverse word. And what I want to key in on
disobedience
is
could be
purposely offensive.
Yeah.
If you are purposely trying to offend somebody, your speech can be considered not only perverse, but profane. So here, follow
Well, like,
me.
if
Hang
I-
on a second.
oh, yeah.
Hang on.
I was just giving an example.
Here's where I'm going to go with that. Generally, profanity, and you can talk to psychologists about this. Anytime you use a word that you think, oh, that might have been perverse, that might have been profane, that might have been offensive, check your emotion and your motive with the word. Because I can tell you right now, generally, when people drop the F-bomb, when they drop a GD, when they drop even SHIT, the four-letter S word, when they drop those words, I guarantee you, not always, but 90% plus of the time, their emotions are escalated. They're irritated about something. They're frustrated about something. They're displeased, and they are expressing their displeasure, and that's when those words come out.
For sure. But I agree with you on it, but I'm also going to take an approach and disagree slightly.
Okay.
If I say a lot of my generation uses these words just as casual ways to express something, is sarcasm profane? Is saying, oh, you're as useful as a broken chair, is that profane? Like, at what point, why have we given these specific words so much power when anything with ill intent could be considered profane? And why do we not shy away from it as much as a lot of people I know use like OSH or something just as the same way of saying like, oh wow, like that's the same thing. And so when does it become profane and when is it just another word?
Okay, that's a great question. And so like the four-letter S word, okay, I would prefer that you not use that. But to your point, if you let that slip occasionally, like, oh, if some
Me and the lima beans.
You and the lima beans, or the dog got out. You know, sometimes we're going to the car and Dakota will run out the front door. Well, you know what? Nobody's going to hell if you, your mother, or I happen to say, oh, the dog got out. Now, generally, we don't say that because, again, I have trained myself.
But it's the attitude
I
behind
just
it.
don't want to use those words. And here's what we need to teach to the younger generation, because you have to realize, again, we're trying to bridge the gap between generations. Younger generations, you're desensitized to it, and it just really is not that big a deal anymore. Okay, I'll give you that. But you got to give me the fact. I had this conversation with a lady that is very gracious. She is a top-notch kind of lady, 5-star. She was a corporate marketing executive for Fortune 500 companies.
Wow.
That's what type of professional background she has. And she heard me kind of talking about some of this stuff in just passing about how the younger generation is desensitized, especially to the F-bomb. Her mouth was wide open, and I could tell it. And I looked at her and I said, does that shock you? She says, I'm blown away.
Yeah.
She said, I didn't know that.
Like, it doesn't faze me when I hear it in mute. Like, Mama, like, somebody makes like a reference in music, or it comes on the radio or in a movie, and Mama's like, oh, and I'm like, what? What did they say? Like, I don't even like register it half the time. It's just another word. So, because we hear it so often, you just don't give it the same power.
Okay. So, but somehow bridging the gap. Youngers, I got to give it to you. I'm not going to condemn you for saying the word, because my personal relationship with Jesus and my views on Christianity, I'm not going to hang those over what words you choose or choose not to use. It's much bigger than that. I want to know what the condition of your heart is. And so if you're dropping F-bombs and the condition of your heart is, I want to condemn somebody, I hate someone in this moment, and I'm using the F word as the adjective to help describe how irritated I am with them, I'm more concerned about the condition of your heart in that moment than I am the word that you use.
Because any word could be used. It's just the common words that are used that we've given power to. But any word or any statement could be used to be in a negative, derogatory way, but the words that we commonly hear are the ones we associate with it.
Yes.
Right, yes.
And I think I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
So again, You jump in on me, girl.
Sorry,
and I'm
I
like,
get
let me
excited.
finish. So,
I know,
but
y'all
here's
can't see this, but he has his hand like stretched
I
out. looking at
do.
me.
I'm
Go
like,
ahead.
but let me get this thought out. I'm trying to give you some grace. I'm trying to give your generation some grace on the words that you've been desensitized to.
Yep.
But I'm telling you, you got to give us some grace as your elders because we don't like it.
No.
And we're doing our best to relate, and we're doing our best not to judge. But I'm just flat out telling you, we don't like it. And you can say, well, what difference does it make? Well, here's the harsh reality. A lot of us are still in the workplace, and we're the ones that are still doing the
Y'all are the
hiring.
bosses.
We're the bosses, and I'm all for the transition that's occurring because a lot of us are getting older. I'm all for developing the next generation. I am all for that, and we have to do that. But you got to know, if you walk in as a young person in my business meeting and you start dropping F-bombs because they're just casual language to you, you're on my radar, and I don't like it. And so can you say that again?
It's unprofessional.
It is unprofessional.
You have to know your audience.
Yes.
It's one thing to, be cussing in a conversation with people your own age because we are all desensitized to it, right? It doesn't affect us as much. It is another word to a lot of people. But if you're talking to your parents or your grandparents or your parents' friends or your boss or, the business investors you're trying to get to invest in your company, then know your audience, keep it professional, talk to them like you would to your grandmother, talk to them like you would your grandfather. And if your grandmother and grandfather cuss up a storm, talk to it like you're talking to a priest, keep it professional, because there is a big difference between casual conversation and professional conversation. It's just like how you don't show up to an interview in ripped jeans and a band t-shirt unless that's the audience that's hiring you. And so that's why you dress up nice for it, is because of your audience and the attitude and the expectations that are being placed upon you. And so there is a big difference. I'm not saying that we should be excused and we should be able to use these language anywhere and everywhere, because honestly, your generation shouldn't be forced to adapt to the way we communicate with each other, because y'all use a lot of terms we don't get and we don't understand, and y'all have a lot of terms we think are profane and shouldn't be used anymore. There's a lot of words to describe medical conditions and things that we go, why are y'all saying that? But then we have to remember that we use a lot of words that y'all go, I can't believe she just used that. And so it's knowing your audience, that when you say the R word to somebody your own age, it's a lot different than saying it to someone my age, because our reaction to it, that is a taboo word in my generation, is calling someone that.
Which word?
The R word. I don't want to say it, but
help me out.
Yeah.
Write it.
I'll write it down. But it's knowing your audience. Knowing your audience is, but like my generation hates words like that, that are derogatory to people.
Yep.
And so calling out someone for something they can't control, right? We hate that. Using derogatory words for it, that's taboo for us, just like the profanity that my generation uses is taboo for y'all. And so it's knowing your audience, which I think is a lot about what generation to generation is about. Isn't about having to force yourself to completely adapt to the new times or to the old times. It's just being wise enough and taking the time to learn who your audience is and who you're speaking to. Because if an older person only ever wants to talk to me about back in their day and doesn't want to even learn what I'm interested in, what I'm doing, how the world is changing, then that's on them. But if they take the time to say, I don't understand this, but I still want to hear about it. And I say to them, I know this isn't relevant today, but I still want to learn how you handled it, because there are going to be similar ways that this is applied. You know your audience. You're changing your approach to something. And so same thing with your language. You don't use the words slay and cap or no cap or things like that when you're talking to somebody of an older generation who hasn't taken the time to learn it. So you just remove those from your vocabulary and use words that they understand so that you bridge that gap, so there isn't this distance between you. And so I think that's a lot of the way profanity is. And I wanted to mention something too that's made profanity a whole lot more common that we've talked about is it's the media, right? I went down an internet deep dive this morning on it, right? It really started getting more popular with hip hop music in the late 80s, early 90s, and early 2000s was when music became a lot more profane. But it honestly, it wasn't intentionally started out to be sexualized. A lot of it was about social movements and social injustice. If you listen back to some of the old hip hop, it's a lot about the times and the discrimination and things. And that's the words they're using because that's a part of that culture. And so from outside view, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they just said that. But then when you take the time to understand where they're coming from and you bridge that gap conversationally, you go, okay, this makes sense to me. Now, because that's become so accepted, the newer music and media, it has over sexualized everything. And I think that is something that should still be taboo, because sex is meant for a married couple, right? The over encouragement of it in my generation, I can't stand, right? I think it is, you're forming soul bonds with people that you're not going to see in 3 weeks, things like this. And so it's that, it's the attitude with it. You have to understand the approach and the intent behind it. And if you think your audience isn't going to take the time or even have the understanding to understand your intent behind the word, don't use it. Don't use that metaphor if they're not going to understand it, because there's no gap between it. And so I think a lot about these words is just the intent and knowing your audience behind it.
Yeah, I love that thought. And as you were talking about that, it just, reminds me of something I tell you all the time. And I tell students in the classes that I have the opportunity to teach. Sex is not something that is cavalier or casual.
Yep,
okay?
We've talked about this.
We've talked about that a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. Neither are words, though. And we use words very cavalier and very casual.
Well, casual, but
yeah, cavalier means flippantly.
Yeah.
Okay. So I would tell people, I get it. Everything you just said, you're desensitized to it. It came about with the change in hip hop, all of that.
Movies and ratings and all
everything.
Yep.
And so I would just say that be careful with the words you use.
Yeah. Be intentional.
They should be intentional. They should be deliberate. And you've heard me say this over and over, words mean things. And it's why the R word that you just wrote out for me, for those that may still be trying to guess what that is, it's about the mental state of someone that is underdeveloped. When I was in, let's say, junior high, when somebody did something that was kind of goofy, it was no big deal for us to go, well, you are. And and people would laugh and shrug it off. But now it's become we're more conscious of mental disabilities, and it's more prevalent, and people understand it more, and we've become more sensitive to the words we've used. And as a culture, we have said, hey, that's not an appropriate word to ever use. Well, let's not use that.
A family member used it over Christmas, and all the people under the age of 25 just turned their neck so fast and just looked at him, mouth agape. But all the other people over the age of 30 just carried on, because it's this gap, this word, that the gap has been cut off. The bridge has been broken with it, right? It has not moved into the new generations. And that's the way a lot of the profane words have been, as the older generations have cut off this bridge with the newer generation in this language. And so if you want to effectively communicate with somebody of an older or younger generation, you have to find words that have a bridge between them. And so that's the analogy I'm using, is just if you're using a word that could have multiple meanings or something, you have to assess what the intent is behind it and how the other person is going to react to it before you even consider using it.
Exactly.
And that's about having the knowledge and wisdom to not take advantage of your words, because words do have meaning and words do have power. And so you have to be very careful. Words aren't just something you can throw out there. Words, you can't take them back, right? It's not like a text message you can unsend or a voicemail you can delete off someone's phone, right? They have power. They're out there. And even if you didn't understand the full intensity behind it until after you've already said it, it's still been said. And your initial response to it is going to be your initial thoughts behind it. And so if you say something under your breath, that's why my mom always says sarcasm always has a little bit of truth in it, because your first response to things is generally your initial response, your what your heart is. And then when your thoughts and your brain catches up to what your heart is saying, or what your initial reaction is, you go, oh, wait, I probably shouldn't have said that. And that's when things become malicious.
Yeah, I think those are great thoughts. And, you actually reminded me of a story in this bridging the gap aspect of this. Hey, I would say this to those that are part of my generation. If a younger person uses a word that continually is offensive to you, instead of, but just maybe even ask them, hey, I really, can I just ask you why you're using that particular word choice? Hey, I'm not condemning. I'm just trying to understand.
But I would change your wording of it too.
Okay. I
would say it more. If somebody told me, is trying to tell me they don't like the word I'm using, or they don't understand why I'm using it, I would rather them say something like, can you help me understand what's the meaning and uses behind this word, because to me it means something different, or to me I have a different reaction to it. So can you explain it to me? And at the end of this, if it's still something I'm not comfortable with, could you refrain from using it? And that way you're automatically laying out the expectations before somebody has a chance to jump to conclusions thinking you're condemning them.
I think it's a great way to say
it. Especially when you're talking to someone who may not be Christian. If you are a Christian elder and they know that, it's so easy for people in nowadays to go, well, that's just your Bible talking, something like that. And so by going ahead and laying that expectation out early, saying, I just want to understand it, and if I still don't agree with the meaning at the end of it, can we just refrain from using it? Then you lay that expectation out before they start explaining.
Yep. And I like that.
Yep.
And let me give you a real life example. I think we may have told this story at one point. I don't know. I know you and I have talked about it, but one of my pet peeves is when men start dropping the F-bomb at sporting events. That flies all over me. And so this actually, but this particular event happened a lot earlier. You and two of your cousins had come to spend the weekend with us. So we had the three of you, we had one of your friends. So we had 4 children under the age of 7, and we were at a baseball game, and there were 3 young men, probably in their mid-20s, and they were young military officers because we were in a military town. And it, unbeknownst to me, it was a Thursday night, which we'd never been to the baseball game on Thursday night, but that was dollar beer night. And so these 3 young lieutenants, but these 3 young lieutenants were totally lit, and one of them was over the top lit. And
well, it has a different meaning for me, so we'll use it like that. That's like hype, like.
Yeah, well, for me, it's drunk. Okay, so great point. So he was excessively drunk, and he was excessively using the F-bomb. And so I could tell a lot of people around were looking at him. He was drawing a crowd to himself, and I was real nice. I let it go about 3 times. And then the 4th time that it happened, I leaned up and I put my arms around all 3 of them, and I stuck my head right in the middle. And I said, fellas, I've had about all I can take. I got 4 young children up here, and if you drop another F-bomb, the 3 of you and me are going to rumble right here in these bleachers. Do you understand? And they said, sir, we don't want any problems. I said, I don't either. But I said, I'm telling you right now, we're going to rumble. Now, I was not in full-time ministry at that point. Actually, I was. If you're a Christian, you're always in full-time ministry. And
it was not your profession yet.
But I'm going to tell you, I'll tell you the story to say this. There's a better way to handle that, because I was being antagonistic. They made me mad. They were using a repetitive word that I didn't like in front of my own child and 3 children that were with me, and I didn't like it. I felt like it was disrespectful to everybody that was sitting around them. It was dishonoring. But the way I responded, I felt like I gave them a break by not saying anything for 3 times. And I'm like, okay, I've been as nice as I can possibly be. And I stuck my head up there in the middle of them, and I was totally ready. If somebody, I'm sorry to admit this, but if somebody would have thrown a lick, I'd have been perfectly happy, because I meant it when I said, we're going to rumble, because I was frustrated. I was mad that they were violating what I felt were common rules of decency and decor. There's a better way I could have handled that. Number 1, don't be mad. Don't be irritated. The guy's drunk. He's not even thinking straight. Just tap him on the shoulder and say, excuse me, sir. Very respectful. And say, I have 4 young children with me. And the word that you're repetitively using, I find very offensive. And I would ask you, if you could, would you please refrain from that the rest of the evening? And
I want to talk specifically to anybody in my generation about that too, and how you approach it. Is a lot of people I've heard, when they're like, cussing around kids, well, they're going to hear it at school eventually. They probably already heard it. But here's the thing. Kids don't have the mental capacity to understand intention behind a word. What the true meaning of it is, the intention behind it, and how to use a word. This goes for anything. This is why they don't use the word stupid. It's because they don't know how to properly use it with an intention that isn't offensive or isn't,
abrasive.
It's why they don't use potty words. Is it because until they have the understanding? There's one mom on the internet, and her whole branding kind of for a while was I cuss around my kids and they're allowed to when they can explain to me what the words means and how to properly use them without being offensive. And if they can't do that, they're not allowed to use it. And so it was this whole thing is she's like, I don't want to give these words more power than they have, but I also want to teach them how to watch their words. And so I don't agree with that approach necessarily, but the whole point of it with people my age or younger people is, well, they're going to hear it in school anyway. I heard it worse on the school bus. Things like this is, well, they don't have the capacity, the knowledge to understand the intentionality behind it. And don't be the one to introduce them to that because you aren't their parents. And so let their parents have that discretion about it. Don't watch your language around children just as much as you watch them around the elders. It's because just because they're going to hear it in 4 or 5 years doesn't mean they understand it now.
Yeah, there's a lot of things I could do.
Yeah.
You know, you could make that argument for and say, well, they're going to find out anyway.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but I don't think I need to be doing it in front of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's just that, as I've heard that said a lot, especially by people my age or a little bit older, is, well, they're going to hear it one day on the school buses. Just use discretion with it.
Yep. So let me give you another verse.
Yep.
And again, we may have listeners that are not Christians that don't read the Bible.
Here's why Christians say it. Say what they say. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well,
I was just saying because you're explaining it and you were saying, and I was just saying, now we're explaining why Christians say what they say.
Thank you. Okay. Let me finish. Girl.
Oops.
All right. Yeah. Oops. It's been a long day. This is out of the book of Ephesians, and here's the verse. And again, it's out of the Bible, but here's what I tell friends that are not necessarily Christians. There are a lot of good tips in the Bible that will help your life. And then it's up to you to decide, hey, how much of this do I believe? How much further do I want to go in exploring this? And I would encourage people, continue to explore, continue to ask questions. But here's a verse that I would share out of Ephesians, it's chapter 4, 29. Just listen to this and forget Christianity for a minute. Not trying to proselytize anybody, just listen to the advice. This is the Apostle Paul writing to the church at Ephesus, and it is a corrective letter. He's trying to help them understand some things, but here's what he says, and I would almost say, hey, forget that this comes out of the Bible for a minute. Just listen to the advice. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth. One version says corrupt communication.
Yep.
Do not let any unwholesome talk, any corrupt communication come out of your mouths, but only, I've got those words highlighted and underlined 3 times, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. And so that's my question, regardless of what your generation is what you're about to say, is it beneficial to the people around you? And if there's a better way to say it, if there's a more graceful way to say it, let's try to find that way, regardless of what generation we belong to. And when we speak, let's be deliberate, let's be intentional, let's be gracious. And when we say something, is it of benefit to the people that are listening, whether they're directly involved in the conversation or not?
I
think that's great advice from somebody that wrote that 2,000 years ago.
And it's still relevant today, but you just have to break it down sometimes and understand it. And so I think this has been a very good discussion because we do come from 2 sides of it. But I think through defining the terms of what the Bible says about it, we've come to a similar conclusion, is it's all about your intention, your meaning, and does it build someone up or tear someone down, and knowing your audience essentially it's knowing your audience and being intentional about your words because they have power.
And remember your emotional state. I would seriously recommend to people, hey, if you question, hey, is the word I'm using, is it profane? Well, check your emotional state. And I want to give you this verse too, out of Colossians, which is another corrective letter. And I find the phrasing in this to be exceptionally insightful, because here's what it says. Rid yourself of anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips. Well, why does it group filthy language from your lips
comes from the
with
heart.
those other things? Exactly.
It comes
Say it
from the-
again.
it comes from the heart.
It comes from the heart. So those
Use your mind to
filthy
assess your heart's
things.
emotions before you speak. It's always
Exactly.
the saying, think before you speak.
And so let me read the list again that it groups filthy language with: anger, rage, malice, which means ill will towards someone, and then slander, which is basically gossip.
Yep.
If I got those things in my heart, guess what's going to come out of my mouth? Filthy language. Okay?
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yep. Check your
Okay.
heart.
Check your
I know,
heart.
when I used to get
I love
upset and say things that I probably shouldn't have been saying, even as a kid, Mama would always tell me, you need to go check your heart before you talk to me. And I never really understood it. That was something that like I didn't know how to do because it was never like explained to me. So like talking about this through this lesson, it has made me go, oh my gosh, it means checking at the attitude which the words in my mouth are coming out of. Like, well, I didn't say that right, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. Check the attitude of which my words are coming from.
Because
And
the Bible says that in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And again, for those of you that are listeners that are not Christians, I would just ask you, hey, forget that I just said it comes out of the Bible. It comes out of a book. But here's the advice. Out of the heart, the mouth speaks. So whatever's in our heart, it is going to come out. And it's going to come out in an emotional state generally. And so it's either going to come out with love and grace, or it's going to come out and it's going to be a little mean-spirited, and it may be a little testy, and there may be a little bit of profanity with it.
And I want to include, we're all sinners. No, at the end of the day, right? Even if we're saved, we are still a sinner. And so our walk with Christ, our view of the earth should not be changed by someone else's actions because we stole cookies. Hello. Because we stole cookies from the cookie jar, right? You know, we're still a sinner as much as they are. And so we have to have that approach to it, is trying to condemn people negatively is coming with just as much anger and malice from the heart as them using profane words is.
Yeah, and another way to say that is let's not grade sin.
Yeah.
We've been talking about that for years now. Christians have been notorious for grading sin. Oh, that's a 4 on a scale of 1 to 10. Oh, that's a 7. That's a 10. Well, to your point, sometimes we assign a grade to particular words. You drop a F-bomb. Oh, that's a 10 out of 10. You can't use that one. And it all goes back to context. It goes back to heart. So I think this has been a great discussion. I have enjoyed having you back and being back in the saddle, so to speak. Yep. It's been fun. And this will be the last episode of the year. And so we're excited about 2025 rolling in day after tomorrow. But we'll get this one posted tomorrow, right? On the last day of the year. Exciting. So let's always remember, regardless of what happens, let's always be able to talk from generation to generation.
Hey, if you enjoyed our episode, make sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts and leave a review because it helps people who don't know about us hear our message. And if you want to follow us on our socials, follow us at G2G_podcast on Instagram and Generation to Generation on Facebook.